How do you smother a rebellion before the first torch is lit? Rome answered with roads, riders, and a quiet terror that arrived one message ahead of the mob. Picture a dusty way station on the African frontier. A rider, small beneath an oversized cloak, flashes an imperial pass and dismounts before the beneficiarius guarding the door. Wax is warmed, a seal pressed, and suddenly the map of an entire district changes. A tribal council becomes a summons. A ringleader becomes a guest. By nightfall, a cohort moves without banners along a road that only yesterday seemed ordinary. At dawn, there is nothing to see, no smoke, no shouting, only a silence forced into place by a system that never needed to draw a sword. What were the stakes? The empire's greatest victories were the ones no poet sang: taxes collected on time, harvests untrampled, garrisons free to ride to the next emergency. A revolt that blossomed in one province could tempt a rival king across the border, or encourage a usurper to try his luck with a legion's loyalty. The Pax Romana was never just peace, it was pressure, applied early and precisely, so the public drama of war rarely appeared. Rome didn't create a single intelligence agency with a marble door and a motto. It built a lattice, overlapping and resilient, scouts who read hills and faces, couriers who carried more than letters, road police who knew every trader's schedule, and informers who could turn a family dinner into a state report. The names matter. Speculatores and exploratores rode ahead of columns and lingered in markets. Beneficiarii and stationarii watched the roads, averaging customs work with quiet counterinsurgency. The frumentarii, based at a barracks on the Caelian Hill, were couriers by title and imperial agents by reputation, feared in provinces where a knock at dusk could overturn a career. Client kings, municipal elites, and hostages bound to Roman households stitched the social fabric to the military web. And across it all stretched the cursus publicus, the imperial post, a freeway of hooves and authority that could move an order faster than a rumor. This was not born whole. Under the Julio Claudians, emperors leaned on informers and personal guards to watch the capital, while legions scouted the borders in the old style. By the 2nd century, as provinces stabilized and roads thickened, the frumentarii emerged as the emperor's long arm into distant towns. In the crisis years of the 3rd century, their power curdled into notoriety. Diocletian would eventually retire the name and erect a new corps, the agentes in rebus, attaching inspection and police powers to a more formal courier service. Across centuries, the pattern stayed constant. Rome hardened intelligence into logistics, and logistics into power. How did it work in practice? Collection began with eyes and ears, patrols tracing goat paths, auxiliaries chatting in shrines, letters seized at road stations, elite families volunteering rumors to keep their sons safe. Processing happened in the governor's office, scribes sifting reports for patterns, and in the imperial secretariat, where a handful of men decided what the emperor needed to know. Dissemination relied on the imperial post, but for the most sensitive orders, frumentarii carried sealed tablets and the unspoken threat of the center. Action was swift and targeted: arrest before market day, hostages exchanged at festivals, cohorts shifted quietly to block a bridge or seal a valley. The point was speed to decision. The faster Rome could move information, the fewer swords it needed to unsheathe. We can still touch this system. In Rome, inscriptions from the Castra Peregrina preserve the names of frumentarii who served as couriers and inspectors, a reminder that the emperor's reach had an address. On the rainy edge of Britain, the Vindolanda tablets reveal little things: an invitation to a birthday party, a complaint about cold feet, that double the operational data about unit locations, leave patterns, and supply rhythms. In the Sahara's doorway at Bunyam, ostraca record the pulses of patrols, the predictable beats that made surprise difficult for nomad raiders or would-be rebels. And in the Judean desert, the Bar Kokhba letters show a rebel command desperate for sandals, trying to police traders, and terrified of Roman interception. Archaeology isn't just debris, it's the afterglow of a network. But the real shock is this: the quietest decades of Roman rule may have been the most watched. Peace didn't descend like a blessing. It was manufactured, monitored, and maintained by men whose names rarely made it into the histories. When the system worked, nothing happened, and our sources fall silent. When it failed, we hear the noise of war. To understand the equilibrium, we have to learn to read the silence. Consider one governor on a difficult frontier. He's been warned quietly that a festival next week will gather more young men than usual, that a charismatic priest has been preaching a return to ancestral ways, and that shipments of iron tools have outpaced farm demand. Unknown to him, a rival faction within the same tribe is feeding the same story to a different Roman post, hoping to use the empire's hand to crush competitors. Intelligence is never neutral. It's a battlefield where every tip has a sponsor. If he arrests the priest tonight, elders may close ranks and turn rumor into revolt. If he waits, the network's wider net might expose the collusion and allow Rome to cut deeper, decapitating not just the preacher, but the patrons behind him. This is the razor's edge that turned reports into strategy. Across the map, the same pattern repeats. In Britain, a wooden tablet about boots exposes gaps in a century's defense. In Africa, a tattered ostracon about missing barley reveals a patrol's frequency and a caravan's loyalties. In Judea, intercepted orders show how a rebel leader tried to police his own informers and failed. Strategy isn't always a charge across a field. It's often a minute shaved from a message, a bridge held by a single terma, a meeting delayed until the right guest list is assembled. Julius Severus, whom we'll meet in depth, waged a war of starvation and shadows by turning intelligence into terrain. Others copied the method quietly until it felt like Roman common sense. Why was Rome so ruthless about information? Because allowing revolt to coalesce would doom the empire to permanent crisis. The emperors who lasted preferred boredom to glory. They rewarded governors whose provinces were quiet, not commanders who asked for triumphs. The result was a state that learned to think before it struck, and to strike where paperwork said it would hurt most. Success bred arrogance and risk. Over time, agents became too powerful, communities too wary, and information too distorted by fear. We'll watch that arc, from early efficiency to sclerosis, through the people who wrote and wrote it. Consider what you do with that power. Do you strike fast on partial reports, or wait for certainty and risk a spark becoming a fire? Would you stamp the wax tonight or hold it till dawn? Those choices define Rome's quiet victories. Next, we open the machine that made intelligence lethal. The legion, the auxiliaries, the roads and signals that turned whispers into orders, and orders into outcomes decisive. Why did Rome train legions to march farther than rumors could travel? Because speed, routine, and reporting turned the army into a thinking machine. A legion wasn't just heavy infantry. It was a mobile headquarters that processed information, made decisions, and refashioned landscapes. Camp, march, report, repeat. Every evening a fortified base. Every morning a column that knew the ground ahead from scouts and yesterday's notes. Unknown to would-be rebels, the army's daily habits were reconnaissance in disguise. Consider what you'd have done. Build elite spies, or drill ordinary soldiers until every movement generated reliable intelligence. Day after day, a legion of roughly 5,000 men hid a nervous system in plain sight. At the top stood the legate, with a senior tribune and the seasoned camp prefect who knew every ditch and ledger. Centurions enforced tempo. The cornicularius and clerks harvested reports. Speculatores and exploratores ranged ahead, probing tracks, testing bridges, listening in markets. Beneficiary detached to road stations learned who came and went. Auxiliaries added languages, local maps, and horses. Vexillation detachments gave commanders the freedom to apply pressure without stripping whole frontiers. The result wasn't glamour, it was a bureaucracy wearing segmented armor. Cold and efficient, training created predictability. Recruits learned the sarcina, the hated marching pack, and the art of building a fortified camp before sunset. They drilled with weighted wooden weapons to make iron feel light, marched long distances at a forced pace, and practiced throwing pila until their shoulders burned. Countersigns changed nightly. The tessera carried the watchword down the chain, then returned up for accountability. Punishments were real. Fines, extra duty, flogging, and on rare, notorious occasions, decimation. Rewards mattered too. donatives, promotions, and the centurion's public praise. Discipline wasn't cruelty for its own sake. It was information control, every single night. Weapons served the intelligence plan. The pilum didn't just kill, its soft shank bent on impact, pinning shields and forcing enemies to drop cohesion. The scutum formed moving walls that protected messengers and signalers under missile fire. Cornu and Bucina calls carried orders through dust and fear. Engineers deployed ballistae to interdict roads, not merely to batter walls. Fire beacons and signal flags, where terrain permitted, pushed warnings across valleys. Roads weren't background, they were instruments, measured by milestones and policed by way stations. Even the humble shovel mattered. A ditch across a track could blind an enemy courier. For days, standardization made intelligence cumulative. The same camp grid from Arabia to Britain meant a new unit could read another's leftovers. Where refuse lay, where horse lines stood, how many fires burned. Officers trained to ask the same questions after patrols and file the answers the same way. Hadrian's address at Lambaesis praises drill and inspection, the emperor applauding a legion that could maneuver because it recorded and rehearsed. The army's bureaucracy wasn't dead weight, it remembered. That memory let governors predict rebellion rhythms and move before danger ripened. Quiet provinces weren't lucky. They were managed by schedule and habit, deliberately. Frontiers turned intelligence into architecture. Watchtowers along river lines and walls watched for smoke by day and fire by night. Mile castles on Britain's northern wall doubled as customs posts, counting sheep and strangers. In Tripolitania, Ostraca from Bungem traced patrol, rhythms, and report absences like alarms. Vindolanda's letters expose how a birthday invitation could empty a post at twilight, knowledge a hostile courier might exploit. The point wasn't impenetrability, it was visibility, the steady cataloging of movement. When a pattern broke, commanders noticed. Unknown to travelers, every receipt, pass, and complaint underwrote a risk assessment by morning. Everywhere else, tactical analysis, the road and intelligence equation. Roads shrank time to decision. With fresh mounts, an imperial courier could cover remarkable distance in a day, carrying orders that overtook rumors. Mansiones and mutationes kept riders fed and remounted. Beneficiary at stations checked permits, weighed cargoes, and sometimes opened letters. Arms and seditious messages moved, but they moved through a funnel the state controlled. The Evectio pass wasn't stationary, it was authority on wood and wax. Forgers existed, so cross-checks mattered. Seals, countersigns, and known faces. The faster information traveled, the smaller the required force. Prevention replaced shock, most days. Meet the speculator, the scout who reads landscapes and faces. He rides ahead of the column, buys watered wine, and hears a muleteer grumble about iron tools changing hands. He notes who falls silent when soldiers enter a shrine. He counts hearths by smoke, gauges a field's harvest by stubble height, and sketches a ford from memory. He's popular with commanders and feared by civilians. A man who can deliver a message or an arrest. His pay isn't princely, his power is proximity. Personal stakes run high. If he misreads a whisper, good men march into an ambush. Or worse, a centurion's world is decisions under time. A patrol returns late, short one man with a story about a closed market and a forge that hasn't cooled in days. The auxiliary decurion wants to ride straight for the hills. The legate prefers to seal bridges and wait. Unknown to them, a rival clan is feeding rumors to frame competitors. The centurion weighs discipline against initiative, remembering the last commander who punished haste and rewarded patience. Consider what you'd have done. Pounce on the nearest suspect, or let the watchwords cycle once more and see which doors stay shut at dawn. Auxiliaries made Roman intelligence multilingual. Cavalry allay and mixed cohorts offered speed, but they also offered ears who understood dialects and grievances. Interpreters traveled with headquarters, yet the best translation was trust one on patrol, a joke shared at a village well. Some units were raised locally, their veterans settling nearby and anchoring future recruiting. Others came from far away, honest brokers with fewer ties. Hostages from elite families learned Latin in a commander's household and sent news home even when they said nothing. Networks weren't only paid, they were human relationships, curated by rank, pictet, and prestige, and fear. Logistics doubled as a sensor grid. Granaries recorded shortages. Depots tracked wagons and destinations. A clerk's tally could reveal a hidden workshop faster than a spy. But the real shock was access. A grain courier with the emperor's pass could walk into warehouses and temples, demanding inventories and hospitality. That badge opened doors that gossip never could. The army's itinerary culture, preserved in roads, milestones, and later maps, taught commanders where people would be before they decided to gather. Schedules beat secrets, a festival date, a tax deadline, a delivery window. These predicted unrest more reliably than fiery speeches. Timetables. Consequences followed from this machine logic. If beneficiary flagged unusual iron along a route, the legate rerouted patrols to seize tools and question buyers. If watchtowers marked new fires in upland folds, cavalry sealed the saddles and cut the ridge paths. Unknown to the conspirators, a detachment had already turned to Smith and copied his customer list. No banners, no trumpet calls, just doors opening at dawn and names read aloud. Tactically, it felt dull. Strategically, it was decisive. Deprive rebels of movement and material, and you deprive them of choices. Plans shrink, coalitions fracture. Courage goes hungry, very, very hungry. This is the machine Julius Severus would wield in Judea. Legions that thought in ledgers, auxiliaries that translated rumor into routes, and a road network that let orders arrive one day before disaster. He didn't chase a glorious battle, he starved one into inexistence. We'll follow that campaign next, but hold the strategic choice in mind. Would you trade a single, decisive clash for months of attrition shaped by reports, arrests, and sealed passes? Rome did, again and again. The cost was team and bitterness. The benefit was survival. In an empire, the quiet solution is often the hardest. Decision. Why did Julius Severus refuse the decisive battle that Roman pride usually craved? Because in Judea, a single mistake could turn a hillside into a graveyard. And he knew victory would come from starvation and shadows, not banners and trumpets. This choice would smother a messianic revolt, remake the province, and remind emperors that intelligence, not shock, keeps empires alive. When the revolt erupted around 132, Roman routine broke. Villages dug tunnels and linked caves. Rebel coins proclaimed the freedom of Jerusalem. The governor's authority shrank to roads he could garrison. At the center stood Shimon bar Kosiba, styled Bar Kokhba, the son of the star, a commander who fused religious hope with ruthless discipline. Letters from the desert show a leader obsessed with sandals, grain, weapons, and loyalty, praising obedience and threatening death. Across the sea, an aging Hadrian needed quiet, not glory. He recalled Sextus Julius Severus from far Britain, a professional who knew how to turn legions into a noose. Severus read the ground before he moved. Exploratores mapped wadis and ridgelines, pacing how long a man with a load could travel between cisterns. Speculatores slipped into markets, counting mules, listening to muleteers, noting which smithies burned after curfew. Frumentarii carried sealed target lists to road stations and fortlets, where beneficiaries sorted rumor from pattern and marked buyers of iron and leather. The aim was not merely to find rebels, it was to find the rhythms that fed them, festivals that gathered men, payment days that moved coin, harvests that disguised grain requisitions. Unknown to the insurgents, their calendar betrayed them. Tactically, Severus inverted expectations. He refused the clean geometry of a set-piece fight and embraced messy attrition. He cut the province into slices with marching columns, overnight camps, and improvised blockhouses on knolls, then linked those nodes with patrols. Rivers and wadis became boundaries that he owned by daylight and watched by night. Cavalry alae and light infantry auxiliaries hunted couriers and caught them between towers whose fires spoke across valleys. He denied the rebels mass. Every time scouts reported a gathering, severed tracks appeared behind it. Every time a cache was found, a second, previously unknown cache went on a list to bait a return. Intelligence was the killing arm. Character determines tempo. Severus, wary of laurels, measured success in captured messages and empty magazines. Bar Kokhba, proud and suspicious, demanded absolute compliance and punished hesitation. Some letters show commanders berated for failing to arrest traitors. Others order wood, barley, and men with sandals ready by a fixed date. The tone is urgent and thin. A leader cannot inspect every cave, cannot watch every ally, and the more he threatens, the less his messengers can improvise. Severus amplified that rigidity, forcing his enemy to choose between speed and control, and to lose both. Phase 1 was reconnaissance and force. Mixed columns moved on fanned axes, never too far to support one another. Patrols traced the paths from orchards to caves and from caves to market squares, adding names to lists: a miller, a tanner, a potter who fired at odd hours. Hostages came next, politely requested from elites with excuses about cross-border bandits. The message was soft power with hard edges. Refuse, and your son would travel to a distant legionary camp for his own safety. Accept, and your rival's son might travel instead. Local politics became Roman leverage. Phase 2 was isolation. Fortlets appeared near springs and at the mouths of dry ravines. Cisterns were capped under guard. Bridges were repaired with gates that could be closed at sunset. The governor's officium rerouted tax convoys along roads flanked by towers, starving the old byways. Vexellationes detached to choke upland paths, moving often enough to remain unpredictable. Meanwhile, Severus pressured friendly towns to host grain stores and shoe depots, not for charity, but as bait and to anchor patrols. The rebels could still move, but only by steps the legions had anticipated. Phase 3 was the intelligence-led siege. Beitar, a stronghold perched above terraced hills, wasn't rushed. It was ringed. Severus spread his legions and allies into a living wall, probing by night, withdrawing by dawn, and tightening whenever a messenger was caught. Auxiliaries who spoke local dialects shouted false orders in the dark to sow confusion. Sappers dug where rock admitted it. Elsewhere, they piled brush for smoke to foul air in tunnels. When relief attempts came, they found ravines already seeded with pickets and traps. There was no triumphant charge, no eagle lifted over a shattered gate. There was a long wait and an enemy growing smaller. Why did Severus deny the decisive engagement? The answer is terrain and psychology. In Judea, a disciplined Roman line could be harried from above. Channels narrowed by terraces and towers that funneled cohorts into spear range. A defeat or even a mauling would echo to Syria, Arabia, and Egypt. Severus chose to treat the revolt as a logistics problem. Kill hunger, kill time, kill hope. He redefined success metrics. Number of letters intercepted per month, number of cisterns sealed, number of shoemakers under watch, number of hostages quietly returned to fathers who now owed Rome a debt. These figures, dry and cold, told him when to squeeze. Archaeology preserves the struggle's texture. In the desert south of the Dead Sea, the Cave of Letters yielded wooden and papyrus messages bearing the name of Shimon bar Kosiba, instructions for supplies, complaints about uncooperative villages, and orders to punish. The handwriting is hasty, the request practical. Send men, send food, send sandals. These are not the slogans of triumph, they're the ledgers of survival. Nearby caves gave up household goods left in flight: keys, mats, needles, testimony to communities trying to disappear into stone. Roman camps and temporary works dot ridgelines that once overlooked these layers, remnants of a siege without heralds. Consider what you would have done at Beitar. A direct storm could end it in a day, or kill a cohort a century had taken years to polish. A long cordon would cost time and invite disease, yet expose enemy couriers to capture. Severus chose the cordon, enduring boredom and strain to harvest intelligence. Every captured note was a thread pulled from the revolt's fabric. Every hungry deserter who traded a cave for a ration added a name to a roster. Over weeks, then months, the list turned into raids, the raids into arrests, and the arrests into a final collapse that chroniclers later summarized in a single line. Personal stakes sharpened the drama. For Severus, failure meant imperial disappointment and a stain he could never wash away. For Hadrian, another disaster after the early reverses would compromise the prestige he poured into building projects and border reforms. For Bar Kokhba's lieutenants, the men named in letters, entrusted with villages and valleys, every missed delivery risked a flogging or worse. There is a letter that scolds a local for refusing to send troops, another that insists on seizing grain from a reluctant settlement. Behind each command is a family, a field plowed under, a child going hungry while adults barter fear for safety. The climactic months were quiet in the way only sieges can be. Distant horns, smoke creeping under rock, scouts counting footsteps in the dust. When Beitar finally fell, later tradition remembers the day with grief. The Roman narrative offered no fireworks, only completion. The casualties were atrocious, the confiscations harsh, and the reconstruction swift. Roads were regraded, a new urban order rose from the rubble. The name of the province would soon be folded into a broader Syria, Palestina. The strategy had worked. The cost would linger. Tactical analysis clarifies the calculus. Severus traded tempo for certainty and casualties for intelligence. He conserved centurions, the irreplaceable backbone, by spending time, the empire's most replenishable asset. He built redundancy. If a courier escaped one patrol, the next tower's watchers would note his passage. If a cache was missed in one sweep, the controlled market would flush the buyers. He integrated carrots into the stick. Amnesties for informers, tax relief for towns that produced lists, honorable treatment for hostages whose families cooperated. The result was not love. It was order maintained at a temperature just below open flame. But the real shock was glorious nature of the win. Judea was reshaped, Jerusalem refounded, and fear institutionalized. The same agents who strangled Beitar soon shadowed senators. If intelligence ruled provinces, who ruled intelligence? In Rome, whispers became weapons. Choose your side. Why would an emperor fear the men guarding his bedroom more than the barbarians across the frontier? Because in Rome, power pooled where information flowed, and the guardians of messages, the informers, courtiers, and elite soldiers, could make or break a reign. This choice would shape campaigns far from Italy, tilt budgets toward loyal units, and teach emperors to prize quiet over glory. Unknown to many senators, their battles were fought in whispers, with wax seals, not spears. Under Augustus, the rules were soft: cultivate loyalty, reward discretion, and keep soldiers out of politics. Under Tiberius, the edges hardened. Treason trials multiplied, and delatores, professional accusers, learned to turn private grudges into public revenue. Tacitus records how a careless toast or poem could end a career. The Senate learned a new drill: stand, praise, condemn, confiscate. The legions watched the capital and took their cue. If Rome devoured itself, provinces smelt blood. Why did conspiracies thrive under emperors who preached vigilance? Because surveillance breeds both caution and resentment breeds plots. The Pisonian conspiracy against Nero in 65 began as salon talk and ended with arrests, forced suicides, and promotions for energetic informers. Strategically, the lesson for commanders was bleak. Triumphs mattered less than trust. A governor with victories but suspect loyalties could be recalled. One with bland reports and reliable friends prospered. In this climate, the Praetorian Guard became more than a body of elite infantry. It was an intelligence filter. Prefects controlled access, curated documents, and whispered interpretations that could color an emperor's mood. A nod could send a provincial report to the top of the pile. A frown could bury it. The imperial secretariat, ab epistulis, a libellus, turned raw letters into decisions, and men who mastered that pipeline mastered Rome. Enter Lucius Aelius Sejanus, the archetype of the ambitious prefect. While Tiberius retired to Capri, Sejanus tightened loyalty oaths, shifted cohorts, and planted his clients in key posts. He controlled who saw the emperor and how they were framed. Senators courted him, equestrians feared him. Provincial governors treated his letters as law. For a while, Rome belonged to a man who commanded no legion, but commanded every conversation that reached the throne. Why did he fall? Because information cuts both ways. Once Tiberius believed Sejanus aimed at the purple, the same machinery that elevated him destroyed him. Orders flashed to the Senate, his statues toppled, his allies recanted. Strategically, the episode set a doctrine. No single officer should monopolize the intelligence flow. Emperors began to triangulate. Praetorian reports balanced by frumentarii dispatches, gubernatorial letters checked against private envoys. Tactical analysis matters here. In a continental empire, the center always knows less than the frontier, and the frontier always knows the center can punish. Information asymmetry breeds distortion. Delators inflate threats to win favor. Governors underreport unrest to keep office. Commanders cherry-pick victories. The solution is redundancy, multiple channels, overlapping jurisdictions, and periodic inspections. The cost is paranoia. The benefit is resilience when one channel goes dark or lies. In the High Empire, frumentarii embodied that redundancy. Officially couriers and logistical agents, they evolved into inspectors who could bypass governors and deliver sealed directives. Their home, the Castra Peregrina on the Caelian Hill, appears in inscriptions that list ranks and assignments, a paper trail set in stone. To provincials, a frumentarius meant the emperor's eyes were in town. To governors, he was both help and threat, a reminder that Rome believed, but verified. On the roads, beneficiarii and stationarii extended this quiet grip. They checked permits, intercepted suspects, and collected gossip that could impale a rival. Local elites learned to feed these posts with tidbits, trading information for favors. The effect on provincial politics was profound. Instead of mass uprisings, Rome faced factional petitions. Instead of open defiance, it managed rivalries with targeted arrests and tax leniencies. Power moved in small, relentless increments. But the real shock was how much this provincial web pulled politics inward. Emperors who trusted agents more than aristocrats centralized decision-making. Hadrian, meticulous and mobile, prized quiet provinces and wrote brisk marginal notes that cut through pomp. Antoninus Pius, cautious by temperament, rewarded officials who produced stability, not spectacle. Pride in invisible victories created a culture where a bold field commander could look dangerous simply by being popular with his troops. Files multiplied. Reputations shrank beneath the accumulating weight of suspicion and fear. Why did some governors refuse pitch battle even when they had the numbers? Because politics punished risk. A defeat, however explainable, could attract delators and ignite palace whispering. A slow, intelligence-led squeeze promised safety. Commanders learned to choreograph caution, prearrange reports, carefully worded dispatches, and hostage exchanges that proved they were in control. The army adapted. It became a tool for reassurance as much as conquest, a stabilizer for anxious masters. The correspondence of Pliny and Trajan in Bithynia shows the logic at work. When Pliny requested permission to form a small fire brigade, Trajan refused, fearing any collegium could become a faction. From a tactical perspective, even benevolent associations represented uncontrolled networks, meeting places, loyalties, routines. Better to manage danger with professional soldiers and vetted agents than to allow citizens to self-organize. Security trumped efficiency, and that preference echoed on the battlefield. Under Domitian, the pendulum swung hard. Informers flourished, trials proliferated, and senators learned to speak in riddles. The emperor styled himself guardian of morals and security, but fear corroded honesty. Military budgets remained high, yet initiative shrank. Officers who showed flair risked envy. Officers who kept files risked promotion. The long-term result was paradoxical: a stronger palace, a quieter senate, and a field army increasingly managed like a police force. Then came the age when protectors killed as often as they guarded. Commodus died at the hands of his household. Septimius Severus rose with Praetorian support, then broke their independence by stationing legionaries near the capital and raising pay across the army. Caracalla lavished donatives and traveled with a heavy guard, yet fell to a soldier on the road. The imperial message was unmistakable: fear your enemies, but fear your friends more. As emperors turned over with increasing speed in the 3rd century, frumentarii accumulated both tasks and enemies. Provinces complained of extortion. Elites dreaded surprise inspections that felt like shakedowns. Sources hint at abuses because fear encourages exaggeration, But the pattern is consistent. When central authority weakens, agents improvise. Strategic consequence follows. Information quality drops as people tell inspectors what they want to hear. Decisions based on bad data magnify instability. Tactically, regimes that live by preemption face a calibration problem. If you punish every rumor, you flood the system with false positives. If you ignore whispers, you invite catastrophe. The military version is familiar. Punish reconnaissance failures hard, but not so hard that scouts stay safe and silent. Rome's answer was layered verification. Compare a delator's claim with road station logs, supply ledgers, and messenger routes. Then strike with limited, demonstrative force. Evidence anchors these claims. In Rome, dedications from the Castra Peregrina list frumentarii by name and unit, a roster of men who carried not just grain orders but authority. Legal texts discuss the rewards and dangers of delation, marking moments when emperors tried to bridle it. Inscriptions across the provinces record beneficiary at way stations. The Notitia Dignitatum, though later, preserves the logic of an administrative world where information equaled power. Consider the stakes through 3 lives. A Praetorian prefect claws upward by producing results, files, and arrests. Every enemy he makes today will pursue him tomorrow. An emperor like Antoninus Pius prizes calm and will sacrifice spectacle to keep it. A governor senses that an honor guard at his door means trust or suspicion, he can't tell which. What would you have done? Court the prefect or cultivate the province? But the real shock was that the emperor's most dangerous opponent often wore a uniform he had issued. The more Rome relied on internal monitors to guarantee loyalty, the more the palace lived at their mercy. Conspiracies no longer needed legions. They needed corridors and keys. When plots came, they came from inside. A freedman with a list, a prefect with a plan, a guard with a dagger and a grievance. Why did this matter for ordinary people? Because palace preferences ripple outward. If emperors feared clubs, towns curtailed festivals. If agents won promotion by producing names, markets learned to talk less. A soldier's courtesy visit to a council chamber could chill debate more effectively than a cohort at the gate. Consider what you would have done in a restless city, host the festival and risk files, or cancel it and risk fury. Unknown to many, this political logic shaped daily life as surely as it shaped campaigns. The same reports that steered legions also steered grain allotments, court cases, even who married whom. The intelligence state wasn't a separate organ, it was the bloodstream. Next, we descend from palaces to streets and barracks to see how soldiers, citizens, and slaves lived under the shadow of watchful order. The question lingers, whose peace was it? Why did Rome turn festivals, markets, and bathhouses into quiet traps for information? Because everyday life produced patterns, and patterns predicted revolt. When people gathered, counted coin, or argued about prices, the state measured pulse and pressure. Unknown to many, the same roads that brought olive oil and gossip also carried watchwords, passes, and warnings. Station guards checked names. Scribes denoted caravans. A clerk's tally could trigger an arrest far away. Consider what you would have done as a governor. Allow a religious fair to proceed and risk clandestine meetings, or fold it into an imperial celebration with oaths, speeches, and friendly patrols. Rome favored the second option. The result wasn't only spectacle, it was surveillance welded to ritual. Peace in practice looked like participation under watchful eyes. Everywhere daily, conquest didn't erase identities. It rearranged incentives. Rome elevated cooperative elites, confirmed land titles, and granted municipal charters that turned towns into engines of tax and order. Hostages from leading families, raised in legionary headquarters or governors' homes, became both insurance and translators of ambition. They wrote to fathers, visited festivals, and returned with Roman taste for law, baths, and Latin honorifics. The empire knit these loyalties through citizenship ladders. Auxiliaries earned diplomas after service. Town councils gained privileges for building roads or temples. Client kings wore Roman names and minted coins with imperial portraits. Yet pressure remained. Collective fines punished villages that sheltered bandits. Colonies of veterans reset the balance. The message was simple: speak Rome's language, follow Rome's calendar, and keep Rome's peace, or watch neighbors claim your future. A soldier's day tells us how surveillance felt. At dawn, he rolled from a straw mattress, checked the duty board, and belted on a sword grown heavy from routine. He drilled, patrolled, and, when the weather soured, rode home. The Vindolanda tablets preserve these moments: a birthday invitation, a request for socks, a list of unit dispositions that unintentionally maps who was absent at dusk. At Bunjem in Africa, Ostraka record patrol schedules, water rations, and reprimands for late returns. Each scrap reads like bureaucracy, yet together they reveal a sensor grid made of chores. When the watchword changed, rumor broke. When a patrol missed its checkpoint, questions multiplied. Intelligence wasn't Mount Exotic. It was the sum of repetition, recorded in ink on fragile wood and pottery. Across the empire, city life magnified these rhythms. Markets throbbed with grain dealers, money changers, and hawkers of cheap wine. Baths filled at fixed hours. Taverns pulsed when pay arrived. Stationarii and beneficiary haunted thresholds, checking permits, weighing cartloads, and asking innocuous questions that mapped loyalties. Collegia, associations of craftsmen, sailors, worshippers, offered structure and mutual aid. They also offered networks outside official control, which is why Trajan refused Pliny's request for a modest fire brigade. Any club could become a faction. Consider what you'd have done as a magistrate in a combustible town: approve the guild and gain efficiency, or deny it and preserve informational primacy. Most chose denial, then compensated with public feasts, spectacles, and targeted generosity. The carrot pacified, the stick awaited behind the law, and the police post sat between. Day after, religion stitched identity and surveillance together. Rome rarely banned gods. It folded them into its pantheon. Local deities found Roman partners: Sullus with Minerva at Aquae Sulis, Mars with tribal war gods everywhere. The imperial cult made loyalty visible: sacrifices on set days, processions, vows for the emperor's health. Priests kept lists, magistrates read names, absences whispered dissent. Jewish communities, bound to a stern monotheism, received exemptions yet still drew suspicion during crisis. Early Christians rejected the ritual language of loyalty and earned files for stubbornness. Tactically, festivals became intelligence harvests. Who brought animals? Who funded garlands? Who stayed away with an excuse? Unknown to celebrants, the census of piety doubled as a census of political risk. Rituals soothed crowds and fed the governor's ledger. Records endured, memories shaped future decisions. Slaves and freedmen lived where secrets slept. In great houses, they carried letters, poured wine, and learned tensions before guests said a word. Some became delators, trading accusations for freedom or favor. Others served quietly, then rose by manumission into the imperial service, where literate freedmen managed archives, petitions, and payrolls. Their loyalty was personal, their reach astonishing. A freedman's recommendation could speed an appeal. His silence could bury it. For ordinary slaves, risk lived closer. Inform on a seditious master and you might win notice. Stay loyal and share his punishment. Consider what you'd have done in a troubled household. Whisper upward to survive or endure in hope of kindness. Rome's class system rewarded useful voices and broke stubborn ones, filing both. Files traveled farther than private prayers ever. Tactical analysis clarifies Rome's social engineering. Carrot before stick, but always both. Towns that kept roads clear earned tax leniencies. Communities that produced names saw hostages returned. Veterans who settled peaceably received bonuses and plots. Meanwhile, collective punishments, targeted arrests, and strategic deportations cut emerging coalitions apart. The aim wasn't mercy or cruelty, it was predictability. When people could forecast consequences, many chose accommodation. Intelligence rode these choices. A schoolmaster's role showed which fathers traveled. A grain shortfall exposed a hidden workshop. A temple subscription list map patrons and clients. Consider what you would have done as a city councilor during a tense feast day. Hand over agitators to protect your poor, or hold the line and risk a levy. Rome counted on fear's arithmetic. It rarely misplaced that grim calculation. The countryside carried different pressures. Latifundia spread across conquered plains, worked by tenant farmers and slaves whose seasons aligned with tax schedules. Villas watched crossroads, overseers logged deliveries, estate shrines doubled as community magnets. Veteran colonies sat like nails along highways, their gridded streets sown with smallholders who owed Rome their stake. When banditry surged, roads thickened with patrols and posts. When harvest failed, governors weighed relief against the risk of crowds. Unknown to many landowners, their ledgers were intelligence. A sudden spike in iron purchases, a missing shipment of salt, an unusual number of strangers at a sheep fair, each entry rang an alarm. But the real shock was subtle. Economic dependence made rebellion rare not only from fear, but from habit. Routine bound hearts and hands to scheduled labor. 3 lives show the pressures at human scale. A soldier on the northern frontier trades jokes at a bathhouse and hears a boast about iron tools changing hands. He files a brief note that redirects a patrol and saves him from a night march. A city councilor in a wavering town receives an unsigned list of hotheads. He dreads the choice, then surrenders 3 names and watches the form calm while his conscience rages. A weaver's daughter serves wine to a speculator and a priest. Their measured politeness freezes her tongue, but she remembers who looked toward the door. Consider what you'd have done. Speak and become a source. Stay silent and hope the tide doesn't find your door first. Every choice echoed along roads, records, and remembered names forever. Archaeology lets us hear the quiet. Wooden tablets, inked letters, scratched ostraca, and dedicatory inscriptions preserve a world where order depended on predictable habits. Diaspora communities negotiated place with levy exemptions or oaths. Merchants balanced profit against scrutiny. Soldiers balanced camaraderie against caution. The empire measured success by uneventful days. Taxes collected, roads safe, temples busy, garrisons bored. Yet this equilibrium carried a cost. Informers multiplied, trust thinned, agents learned to live on fear. When frightened rulers reward whispers, everyday life hardens into a file. That pressure produced a reaction. By the late 3rd century, elites demanded relief from abusive couriers. Emperors demanded reform. The system would change its name, tighten its procedures, and sharpen its bite. Could reforms tame abuse without blunting speed? We'll test that turning point next. What do you do when your couriers are feared more than your cohorts? In the 3rd century maelstrom, emperors rising and dying within months, frontiers buckling, coinage thinning to ash. The empire discovered that its greatest danger wasn't a barbarian charge. It was bad information and undisciplined power in the hands of men who carried seals. The frumentarii, once humble couriers and supply agents, had swollen into inspectors and enforcers whose visits could unmake careers. Their reach stabilized provinces. Their abuses poisoned trust. Unknown to many, this was the hinge of the Roman security state. If you were emperor, would you prune the vine or rip it out by the roots? Diocletian chose the knife and the blueprint. A soldier from the Balkans with the patience of a clerk and the will of a hammer. He understood that survival meant procedure. He built a tetrarchy, divided authority into shareable parts, and then re-engineered the empire's nervous system. The frumentarii were phased out, their name tainted, and their habits notorious. In their place, he empowered a new formal corps under the Magister Officiorum. The agentes in rebus, agents in affairs, couriers with inspection teeth in a chain of command that led into the palace. The message was surgical. Keep the function, kill the stigma, centralize the leash. Why would centralization help an empire so vast? Because speed without control breeds panic, and control without speed breeds blindness. Diocletian's genius was to fuse roads, posts, and paperwork into one instrument. The Magister Officiorum was given the cursus publicus to manage, the state post with its mansiones for lodging and mutationes for fresh mounts. and with it the ability to regulate who moved fast and why. An evectio pass became a weaponized credential. Categories of travel, seals to verify them, penalties to punish to forgery. The agentes in rebus supervised the passes, rode them, and audited the stations that served them. The lattice hardened, the center learned to read. Consider the tactical logic. A revolt is a race between gathering and response. In the early empire, a governor's private network and a few trusted frumentarii could win the race or lose it, depending on personalities. Under the new system, reports followed standard routes and formats. An agent could appear unannounced in a provincial capital, demand to see road station logs, grain accounts, and the governor's outgoing correspondence, and then gallop for the nearest diocese headquarters with a digest of anomalies. The more uniform the inputs, the more visible the deviations. Centralization isn't romance, it's arithmetic. Meet one agent in rebus, a composite drawn from laws and letters. He carries an ivory diptych with an imperial cipher, a worn cloak that looks cheaper than it is, and the right to requisition horses in the emperor's name. He arrives at dusk, not dawn, because surprise is a classroom. The station master bows and produces ledgers, who received mounts, which seals were broken, which carts carried iron when they swore they carried grain. The inspector turns pages like a centurion counting blows, steady, inevitable, and then asks for the temple lists from last month's oath day. He isn't hunting a sermon, he's hunting absences. His personal stake is simple and sharp. If he exposes a corrupt chain, he wins promotion. If he overreaches, a governor's friends whisper extortion into the same channels he serves. Evidence shadows these reforms. Laws preserved in later codes regulate the evectio and punish those who abuse the post. Writers like Ammianus call the agentes curiosi, the inquisitive. Half respect, half curse. The Notitia Dignitatum, a late catalogue of offices, places the agentes in the orbit of the Magister Officiorum alongside armories, archives, and the imperial scrinia. That map isn't decoration. It's doctrine in ink. Logistics, letters, and inspections under one roof. A bureaucracy that could move paper and men with equal force. Why call this a turning point, not a mere rebranding? Because incentives changed. Frumentarii had grown by opportunity and custom. Agentes in rebus lived by file and grade. Their careers were layered, sexagenarii, centenarii, ducenarii, pay scales that told ambitious men how far duty could carry them if they produced results that read well at court. That structure shaped behavior. Agents learned to package facts, to compare station logs with tax ledgers, and to treat rumors as testable claims rather than trophies. Governors, in turn, learned that objections earned footnotes, not reprieves. Strategy became a contest of documentation. He who furnished the better paper won the emperor's trust. But the real shock is what discipline does to improvisation. When the center owns the road, the center owns time. Standard forms accelerate routine and expose anomalies. They also channel attention toward what forms can capture. The risk is bottleneck. A flood of reports can drown a magistrate's desk just as surely as it enlightens him. Diocletian's answer was layering. Prefectures, dioceses, provinces, 3 tiers of authority that could filter, escalate, or kill a case. In theory, nonsense died locally. In practice, clever nonsense climbed. Britain offers a cautionary tale. Along the sodden north, a class of border go-betweens grew up. The Ariani, or Arcani, men who slipped between Roman forts and tribal camps, trading news for coin. They weren't agentes in rebus. They were frontier creatures, loosely supervised, quick with a rumor, and quicker with a bribe. After the Great Conspiracy of 367, when Picts, Scots, and Saxons tore holes in the frontier, Count Theodosius arrived to restore order. Ammianus says he abolished the Ariani for treachery and corruption. The lesson was crisp. Local networks without discipline rot. The empire needed scouts, yes, but it needed the kind that reported into a system, not around it. Constantine inherited Diocletian's machine and taught it to sing. He kept the Magister Officiorum, strengthened the scrinia that managed imperial correspondence, and used the agentes to police edicts from coinage to church affairs. He also created new court guards and dignities that signaled proximity to power. Access and information danced closer than ever. Governors discovered that a polite man with a pass could change their month more than a legionary commander with a chronic supply problem. The empire didn't abandon force. It refined the order in which force was applied. First a letter, then an audit, then a transfer, and only then a sword. Tactical analysis clarifies the trade. Centralization buys comparability, speed along fixed arteries, and the ability to inspect the inspectors. It costs local nuance and agility at the edges. A governor who knows a valley's feuds can prevent blood with two handshakes. An agent with a ledger can scuttle both handshakes by misreading a pattern. Which do you prioritize? In quiet times, the center tolerates provincial artistry. In crisis, it defaults to form. The 4th century state lived in near-permanent crisis management. Forms 1. Personal stakes drove the calibration. Diocletian's reputation depended on building a state that ran without him. He retired to his palace, content to grow cabbages and watch the tetrarchy fray. His agents survived him because they served a need, not a man. For a provincial notable, the new order meant opportunity and peril in equal measure. Hostages might be requested with courtesy, accounts might be audited with a smile, a complaint might be answered within a month instead of a year. The cost was a permanent audience. Privacy shrank where passes grew. Archaeology and text meet again to confirm the texture. Inscriptions from Rome stop listing frumentarii and start praising the officium of the magister. Papyri preserve travel authorizations and petitions complaining about the burdens of hosting imperial couriers. Legal rescripts scold officials who demand hospitality beyond their authorization or who use the post for private gain. The very need to regulate tells you two truths at once. The system worked well enough to be worth policing and poorly enough to be policed often. Unknown to many, this apparatus also reshaped military decisions. An inspector's report could freeze a legion's pay until accounts were corrected. A road audit could divert transport animals from an ambitious general to a frontier in crisis. A dossier on a popular commander could keep him far from the capital. Commanders learned the etiquette of paper, how to write victory, how to request without pleading, how to bury a failure in facts that prove prudence. If you've wondered why late Roman generals so often preferred fortified lines, deliberate sieges, and patient cordons, read their correspondence. Risk that stains a file outlives risk that stains a shield. Consider what you would have done as magister officiorum in a year of strain. Couriers complain of exhausted horses, governors of intrusive agents, generals of missing wagons, town councils of arrogant inspectors. Do you tighten rules, fewer passes, harsher penalties, and risk slowing response, or loosen them and risk a return to predation? The craft answer is targeted discipline. Audit the lines that matter most: frontier arteries, grain routes, mint roads. Rotate agents to blunt local capture. Punish abuse in public. Reward accuracy in private. The empire survives on messages that arrive intact and on time. The human drama could be intimate. Picture a governor, careful and proud, handed a sealed order by an agent who doesn't remove his cloak. The letter announces a surprise inspection of road stations and blade workshops. The governor's wife has already heard rumors. Arrival at court, a complaint dressed as concern. Over a week, the agent checks seals, weighs iron, questions scribes. He finds little, notes much, and files a report that damns with faint improvement. The governor keeps his post but loses sleep. The agent rides on, aware that his own margin is as thin as the wax on his tablets. Neither man is villain. Both serve a system that punishes certainty and rewards suspicion. By the late 4th century, the intelligence lattice had become permanent architecture. Titles altered, men came and went, but the grammar of power persisted. Roads monitored, reports standardized, inspectors feared, and local knowledge tolerated only within fenced gardens. The nickname curiosi stuck to the agentes like burrs, admired for diligence, despised for intrusion. The empire had answered the 3rd century's chaos with discipline and files. It paid with anxiety that never slept. But the real shock is how the reform's success planted the seeds of brittle failure. When an empire's reflex is to tighten, it can miss opportunities that require trust. Provinces learned to produce the paper that pleased. Bonds learned to see what procedures could see. Enemies learned to move between the lines. On the worst days, commanders felt like clerks with spears, and clerks felt like commanders without them. Could Rome have survived the storms without this turn? Probably not. Did the turn guarantee that when storms grew, responses would be formulaic? That too seems likely. We stand at the cusp of consequences. Centralization preserved the empire for another century, spread its methods to successors, and taught rulers that logistics and intelligence are one craft. It also hollowed some relationships, accelerated cynicism, and embedded fear in daily life. Consider what you would have done: keep the old abusive frumentarii and risk decay by corruption, or create the agentes in rebus and risk decay by bureaucracy. In the next chapter, we tally the ledger: what the system bought Rome, what it cost the world it ruled, and what traces it left for us to read in stone, ink, and silence. How do you measure a victory that never becomes a battle? Rome learned to count quiet: taxes on time, roads safe at dusk, cohorts moving before smoke rose anywhere. The intelligence lattice, scouts, road posts, frumentarii, and later agentes in rebus, allied elites and hostages, did more than smother uprisings. It changed what security meant. Success became the absence of spectacle. Governors were rewarded for boredom, not parades. Legions conserved centurions by starving enemies rather than charging them. Over generations, that preference reshaped politics, economics, and memory, leaving historians to read silence as testimony and routine as strategy. Yet quiet carried a paradox. The more efficient the net, the thinner the trust that fed it. Informers multiplied because rewards were real. Honesty thinned because fear was cheaper. The quiet province paradox followed. A district with no riots might be truly stable, or simply so suffocated that no one dared speak. Rome tried to tell the difference by watching indicators: tax arrears, grain prices, wagon traffic, festival attendance, informant diversity, and the share of cases closed without force. Strategically, those metrics let governors preempt crises. Socially, they nudged communities towards self-censorship. Tactical analysis clarifies the dilemma. Quiet is a data point, not a verdict. Staff cross-checked station logs against market tallies, compared oath day lists with offerings, and sampled petitions for unflattering truths. They prized variety. If reports came from one clique, they were suspect. If road arrests, tax receipts, and scout notes aligned, action followed. Consider what you'd do as governor with a spotless month on paper and a whisper about iron hoarded in the hills. Raid and risk punishing a rumor, or wait and risk losing the bridge? The craft answer: wait a day, then move at dawn. Militarily, intelligence transformed doctrine. Commanders who once sought decisive shock reoriented around denial, cordons, sieges, forced scarcity, and the capture of couriers. Julius Severus made that method canonical in Judea, and the logic echoed along the Rhine and Danube. The equation favored patience. Protect centurions, spend time, measure progress in intercepted letters and empty granaries. The cost was psychological. Troops starved for laurels. Ambitious officers learned that flamboyant pursuit could end careers faster than cautious success could advance them. Initiative pooled at headquarters, where paper chose targets. On bad days, prudence slid into paralysis and chances slipped past guarded crossings. Administratively, Rome fused logistics and intelligence until roads became sensors. The regulated evectio turned the post into an index of urgency. Station ledgers mapped trade. Agentes in rebus audited both. Benefits were real. Grain moved predictably. Armies arrived fed. Governors redirected carts with a signature. Burdens were visible. Towns endured compulsory hospitality. Landowners lost mounts to requisition, and petitions in later law begged relief from overbearing couriers. Even so, efficiency raised the empire's floor. In many crisis years, the arteries kept pulsing, and that rhythm often decided which provinces endured. Politically, the web drew the capital inward. Prefects, secretaries, and trusted agents curated what emperors read, and the palace learned to govern by triage. That habit stabilized some reigns and sharpened paranoia in others. Delators flourished when rulers paid for names. Truth bent when careers depended on alarm. Asymmetry hardened into policy. The center could punish on rumor. The frontier could only plead with facts. Garbage in, garbage out. Except the garbage could end a life. Purges taught officials to write defensively. The state grew resilient and brittle at once, quick to smother sparks, yet prone to blindness where fear crushed candor. The human ledger recorded quieter costs. A veteran tavern keeper learned to greet inspectors with cheap wine and perfect accounts, teaching his sons that the safest joke was none. A weaver's daughter adjusted to festivals where attendance proved loyalty, memorizing who looked at the ground when oaths were sworn. And agents in Rebus lost sleep after a complaint, aware that one ambitious rival could reinterpret diligence as extortion. A governor practiced controlled ignorance, asking fewer questions about a powerful clan's smuggling to keep them cooperative, then wondered which silence would someday be read as guilt. Peace endured, but so did the small, cumulative anxiety of living audited. Archaeology pins these consequences to the earth. The Vindolanda tablets show officers scheduling leave and dinners that, unintentionally, reveal how thinly posts could be held and the literacy that made thinness survivable. The Bunjam Ostraka plot desert tempo, missed patrols, water rations, reprimands, and proved that routine, not heroics, guarded frontiers. In Rome, inscriptions from the Castra Peregrina and later references to the Magister Officiorum trace the migration from frumentarii to agentes. The Bar Kokhba letters make attrition visible. Requests for sandals, threats to laggards, the brittleness of a movement squeezed by roads. The Notitia Dignitatum catalogs a world where such habits became permanent. What lessons survive for any strategist who governs more than he conquers? First, preemption works when it grows from local knowledge, not from fear. Buy information with status and predictable justice, not just with coin and terror. Second, verify. Layer road logs, tax ledgers, and scout reports. Punish haste, but don't reward paralysis. Third, watch incentives. If careers rise on accusations, you'll drown in rumors. If they rise on accuracy, agents will learn to test their own tips. Consider what you'd have done as the emperor with one precious commodity: time. Do you spend it inspecting the inspectors or visiting frontiers to renew honest networks? Both, or you will lose one. The afterlife of Rome's methods is long, though never one-to-one. Successor states copied the fusion of post and police, built inspectorates that roamed far from capitals, and learned that the fastest weapon is a message with authority. Modern administrations speak of fusion centers. Romans achieved a version with wax and hoofbeats. The strategic echo is simple. Speed to decision beats mass when problems are dispersed. Yet the ancient caution applies. Systems that see everything can miss meaning. Dashboards can tempt rulers to manage numbers instead of people. Consider what you'd advise a modern leader. Build the network, yes, but build the trust that keeps reports honest. But the real shock is historiographical. Rome's most decisive wins evaporated into paperwork, leaving few lines and narratives. When an uprising died as a set of canceled meetings, later writers had nothing dramatic to recount. Glory favored disasters averted late, not dangers averted early. Our clearest witnesses are the humble texts the machine produced: wooden letters about socks, ostraca about camels, dedications by couriers, and late lists of offices. They preserve a state that thought before it struck and preferred victories counted in ledgers to victories counted in corpses. Reading them, you hear an empire say nothing happened, and that is the point. So what did it buy and what did it cost? It bought a century of comparative calm in well-roaded provinces, quicker recoveries after shocks, and a model of governance that later empires would imitate. It cost intimacy, fostered suspicion, and sometimes blinded rulers to truths that didn't fit forms. The ledger is mixed but legible. As we close the file, consider the unanswered questions that still matter. How centralized were the frumentarii at their height? How often did governors manipulate the flow for personal ends? How many near revolts vanished into a single letter we'll never find? And what would you have done with the seal? Why does the last word in a revolt belong to a rider, not a sword? Because Rome discovered that the fastest unit in war is the message, and it built an empire around that truth. Across this hour, we've traced the lattice, scouts and road posts gathering whispers, frumentarii and later agentes in rebus carrying sealed orders, client elites, hostages, and clerks translating rumor into action. The result was a strategy of prevention. Legions fought when they had to, but the preferred kill was administrative. A cancellation, a cordon, a ledger that starved a plot before it could march. Julius Severus in Judea made it doctrine. Diocletian and Constantine hardened it into procedure. Roads, reports, and relationships did what swords could not. They kept the empire's attention ahead of its enemy's courage. What did this buy? Time, above all. Time to move a cohort to a bridge, to seal a valley, to turn a smith, to demand a hostage politely rather than storm a town brutally. It produced quiet provinces where taxes met deadlines and markets reopened after rumor. It conserved irreplaceable centurions by spending bureaucracy instead of blood. But it also carried costs. Delatories thriving where praise was paid by accusation, governors writing defensively, soldiers who learned that glory could be fatal to careers. The quiet province paradox lingered. Was silence stability or suffocation? Tactical wisdom answered with verification. Cross-check a festival list with road station logs. Measure grain flows against workshop smoke. Value informants who disagree. Accuracy, not noise, buys peace that lasts. Why should modern readers care? Because the logic is familiar. Every state seeks speed to decision. Every commander wrestles with the trade between agility and control. Rome's cursus publicus was a pre-digital network where authority moved faster than rumor. The agentes in rebus were roving inspectorates. Frontier way stations were analog fusion centers. The lessons endure. Integrate logistics and intelligence. Reward truth even when it hurts. Beware perverse incentives that pay for alarms rather than accuracy. Build redundancy so a single channel can't blackmail the center. And remember the human terrain. Relationships outpace reports when crisis hits. Consider what you'd do today if a province, real or metaphorical, showed perfect statistics and uneasy faces. Do you celebrate quiet or interrogate it? Archaeology keeps us honest. Vindolanda's wooden letters, Bungem's ostraka, the inscriptions from the Castra Peregrina, the Bar Kokba correspondence, and the later Notitia Dignitatum give us fragments of the machine at work. They prove routine, expose abuse, and map the tempo of response. Yet unanswered questions remain. How centralized were frumentarii operations at their peak? Did governors systematically game the post to hobble rivals? How many near revolts vanished into a single arrest that left no literary trace? Did the Ariani of Britain represent local genius or local rot? And how far did universal citizenship after 212 change the pool of informants and the ethics of delation? New tablets and papyri may still revise our picture, one inked complaint at a time. What would you have done with the seal? As emperor, do you empower agents to pry everywhere and risk a state that breeds suspicion, or loosen the reins and risk missing the one letter that mattered? As governor, do you strike on the second tip or wait for the third? As citizen, do you sign the oath loudly or let your silence write its own report? But the real shock is this: Rome's most decisive victories were invisible by design. When nothing happens, the machine has worked. The call to action is simple. Read the small text, the socks and birthdays at Vindolanda, the patrol notes at Bungem, the desert pleas of Bar Kokhba's lieutenants. They teach strategy in miniature. And join us as we follow Rome's methods into their afterlives, from late imperial agentes to medieval couriers and beyond, where the fastest weapon is still the message, and the first casualty of delay is control. Before you close the file, weigh the lesson that outlived Rome. Strategy is the art of buying tomorrow with today. Messages buy hours, trust buys years. Choose your currency wisely. Consider what you'd prefer on your frontier: more spears or faster truth. Rome answered with roads and records. Your answer will decide your peace for a long time.